All right, we begin with the Fox News alert. The president and first lady are preparing to pay their respects in Pittsburgh, as some in the city say he's not welcome there. Well, Britt Hume on the blame game and analysis of the president's exclusive interview with Laura tonight. There's a new military operation underway at this hour to keep multiple caravans of migrants from illegally entering the U.S. And we're getting reports tonight of violence at the Mexican border with Guatemala, where police are clashing with migrants determined to get into Mexico. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. In that interview, the president said the media is contributing to the divisive political tone in America and shot down the suggestion that he is anti-Semitic given his pro-Israel stances and the fact that his daughter, some of his own grandchildren, are Jewish. Kristen Fisher starts our coverage this evening. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, the plan is for President Trump and the First Lady to travel to Pennsylvania tomorrow afternoon. The rabbi at the Tree of Life Synagogue, where this attack took place, he says that President Trump is welcome. But nearly a dozen other Jewish leaders from a national organization for progressive Jews say that this president is not welcome in their city.
I'm going to pay my respects. I'm also going to the hospital to see the officers and some of the people that were so badly hurt.
President Trump has been using words like wicked and evil to describe the deadliest attack on Jews in American history. But 11 Jewish leaders say it's the words he's used over the last 3 years that have, quote, emboldened a growing white nationalist movement. The letter goes on to say, President Trump, you are not welcome in Pittsburgh until you fully denounce white nationalism. After this headline-making declaration at a rally last week,
You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay?
Tonight, Fox's Laura Ingraham asked President Trump if he'd like to clarify what being a nationalist means to him.
To me, I don't have to clarify. It means I love the country. It means I'm fighting for the country. I'm proud of this country, and I call that nationalism. I call it being a nationalist, and I don't see any other connotation than that.
As his critics blame him for the violence and eroding civility, President Trump blames the media. Tweeting today, there is great anger in our country caused in part by inaccurate and even fraudulent reporting of the news. The fake news media, the true enemy of the people, must stop the open and obvious hostility and report the news accurately and fairly. That will do much to put out the flame. Today, at the first White House briefing in almost a month, the White House press secretary was pressed to specifically name the journalists and news organizations that President Trump was referring to. She declined.
And if you're going to stand there and continue to say that there are some journalists, some news outlets in this country that meet that characterization, shouldn't you have the guts, Sarah, to state which outlets, which journalists are the enemy of the people?
Well, I think it's irresponsible of a news organization like yours to blame responsibility of a pipe bomb that was not sent by the president, not just blame the president, but blame members of his administration for those heinous acts.
In turn, President Trump was pressed about why he continues to call journalists enemies of the American people when his predecessors, like Ronald Reagan, took criticism from the press as simply part of the job.
He would have fought back. He didn't have social media. It's my form of telling the truth.
So both the president and his critics are really digging in. Neither side is giving an inch with just 8 days until the midterms. And you know, Shannon, most White House briefings are pretty tense, but this one felt especially tense, especially with the press secretary getting really emotional when she was talking about those victims in Pittsburgh.
And really having to re-answer some of the questions, same ones over and over again.
Yeah.
But yeah, they are interesting, and we do get information from them, so they're important.
We do.
Kristen, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, survivors of the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh are mourning and comforting each other tonight. A shooter opened fire Saturday during a baby naming ceremony, killing 11 and injuring 6 others. The suspected murderer made his first appearance in court this afternoon. Correspondent Garrett Tenney has that story for us tonight from Pittsburgh.
Federal prosecutors have already started the approval process to seek the death penalty against the man responsible for what's now the deadliest attack on Jews in U.S. history. At a discussion on religious liberty in Boston, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the full force of the Justice Department will be behind this prosecution.
This was not just an attack on the Jewish faith. It was an attack on all people of faith.
Prosecutors say 46-year-old Robert Bowers killed 11 people on Saturday, all of them Jewish, and told police he wanted to kill all Jews. This afternoon, he made his first appearance in court. The Pittsburgh native was in a wheelchair, still recovering from gunshot wounds, as a federal magistrate read the 29 federal charges he's facing. Prosecutors say the gunman carried an AR-15 rifle and 3 Glock handguns.
I'm pressed up against the wall Carol is kneeling on the floor to my right, and the gentleman walks in with a long gun. I could see that he looked around only because there was a shaft of light as he opened the door. He stepped over Mel's body, didn't pay any attention, stepped back, and walked out.
He also injured 6 others during the attack, including 4 officers.
7-1, shots fired. Give me additional resources. Additional resources, 3rd floor. 3rd floor, contained in 1 room. 1 operator down.
What the gunman likely didn't know, though, is the first hospital workers to treat him after he was shot were all Jewish.
The gentleman was getting off of the ambulance, and he was continuing with his rant of kill all the Jews. What he didn't realize was that the nurse that took care of him, his father's a rabbi, and the doctor in the emergency room is Jewish. And, you know, these people put aside their whatever beliefs they had about what this gentleman was, and to us, he's a patient.
And Shannon, it has been absolutely incredible to see the outpouring of love and support from people of all faiths over the last couple of days. There's been a near steady stream of people, thousands, coming here to the Tree of Life Synagogue to pay their respects and to express solidarity with the Jewish community. Tomorrow, President Trump and the First Lady will make their way to Pittsburgh to express support and offer their condolences on behalf of the entire country. Shannon?
Kira Tenney live in Pittsburgh. Thank you very much. In Laura's exclusive interview tonight, President Trump said the 5,200 troops now deployed to the border as part of Operation Faithful Patriot will keep the caravans, now we know of at least 3 of them, from crossing the border. Trace Gallagher is following the president's plans and those caravans from our Los Angeles newsroom. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. We're told the additional 5,200 U.S. troops should be at the border by the end of this week, including 800 today. The goal of this deployment is, quote, hardening the points of entry. And while that sounds kind of like a human barrier, the military members are only support troops. They can carry weapons for protection, but they're prohibited from contacting, confronting, or detaining the migrants. Instead, they'll provide things like helicopter air support, medical personnel, along with engineers and heavy equipment. The police work per se will all be done by the Border Patrol. Listen.
That is just the start of this operation. We'll continue to adjust the numbers and inform you of those, but please know that's in addition to the 2,092 that are already employed from our National Guard Operation Guardian support that's been so effective.
As for the caravan, the numbers are all over the place. At one point, it was estimated to include about 7,000 migrants, but now that some have accepted Mexico's offer of asylum and others have dropped out because of exhaustion or sickness, it appears the number is now around 4,000, and most are still some 850 miles from the U.S. border. President Trump is again saying the caravan includes bad people like gang members, though he has already acknowledged not having any proof. But tonight he told Laura Ingraham they're not getting in. Watch.
We're going to build tent cities. We're going to put tents up all over the place. We're not going to build structures and spend all of this, hundreds of millions of dollars. We're going to have tents. They're going to be very nice, and they're going to wait. And if they don't get asylum, they get out.
And if they do apply for asylum, history and the law suggest they will be allowed into the U.S. until their cases come up in immigration court, where hundreds of thousands of cases are currently backlogged. Meantime, look at this. Another caravan at the Guatemala-Mexico border is building and battling. The Mexican Interior Secretary has accused the group of violently attacking Mexican police and immigration agents with rocks and glass bottles. A Honduran migrant was even killed by a rubber bullet, though Mexican authorities are denying they fired it. And there is word tonight of a 3rd caravan now making its way through El Salvador toward Guatemala. Shannon.
All right, Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Tense times often call for commander-in-chief with a healing touch. The president said he would tone it down at a rally on Saturday in Illinois. Crowd didn't like it. Same day at the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. Tonight, the president claims the media creates the impression he is divisive, making it hard to unify the nation in times like these.
They talked about Trump in the headline. Now, they didn't do that with Bernie Sanders when he had. They didn't do that with the Democrats when other people came out. They didn't do that with President Obama with the church.
We are joined now by Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume. Welcome. Always
Thank you, Shannon.
I was struck this morning by your tweet earlier today where you said one of the president's problems is he thinks everything is about him, but one of his critics' problems, they think so too.
Right. Well, I think that's correct. I mean, Trump is very self-absorbed. That's not a crippling quality, but he does think everything seems to revolve around him, and he sees things through that prism. So if something happens, he doesn't necessarily view it through a national prism. He views it through a prism of how it affects him and his standing and how it reflects on him. And his critics have the same issue. They're totally obsessed with him. And everything that happens, they trace back to him. They can't stop thinking about him. They can't stop talking about him. And so the result is that when some of these hideous events come along, you know, it's one thing to say that, well, maybe he had something, his inspiration had something to do with the guy who sent the pipe bombs, because that guy was a huge fan. But this guy who carried out this hideous atrocity at that synagogue was a guy who was down on Trump. So how does he get to blame both ways? It makes no sense, and that's where we are, I think.
Well, one of the people making that connection, Senator Dianne Feinstein, I mean, somebody who's been here for decades, and she knows how this all works, and she's seen this country through tragic, terrible times. She says it's difficult not to draw direct lines between the hateful, divisive rhetoric of Donald Trump and an increase in such crimes. She was detailing what we've seen over the last week, a number of very tragic events.
Well, I think that's bad analysis. I don't think you can make that connection. We don't know what was in the mind and what was the influencing factor with some of these people. I just think that's a connection you can't make. But it illustrates the obsession with him and the desire to blame him for everything. I think, you know, a lot of people on the left and in the media, do I repeat myself, considered Trump's election to be kind of a national emergency, in which it was appropriate for them to abandon the usual standards and the customs that we've observed, particularly as journalists, through time. And the old idea of neutral news coverage has kind of gone by the boards, and you see the most extraordinary level of opinion being expressed in what look like normal news stories, but turn out to be something very different indeed. And the dislike of Trump and the mainstream media is universal. These journalists can't stand the guy. They can't stand the sight of him. And I think they think they're doing some kind of public service in trying to bring him down. My own view of that is if Trump is bad news, as they think, straightforward and accurate and balanced news coverage will illustrate that. And the public is not stupid and will see that. And what they're doing, I think, has made them so distrusted by so many people now that it's counterproductive for them and it's terrible for journalism.
Well, the LA Times, under this headline today, shrugging off blame, Trump reverts to divisive rhetoric after shooting. They say this, quote, President Trump, rather than taking on the traditional task of unifying the nation after a deadly shooting rampage, reverted to his usual rhetoric Monday morning, attacking the media as the true enemy of the people and stirring up fear of immigrants. Now, there was a lot of push back and forth about this in the White House briefing today. Here is how Sarah Sanders responded to that.
Very first thing that the president did was condemn the attacks both in Pittsburgh and in the pipe bombs. The very first thing the media did was blame the president and make him responsible for these ridiculous acts. That is outrageous that would be the very first reaction of so many people across this country.
Does she make a fair point?
She does make a fair point. Look, it would be better if Donald Trump had the ability to soothe people's tempers at a time like this. I don't think that's in his skill set, and he can be criticized for that. But basically, the words he spoke in reaction to both these actions were appropriate, and particularly what he said after Pittsburgh was appropriate. And yet we hear the claim made, based on what I can't really fathom, that he's an anti-Semite. I think, you know, and a racist. I think the basis for that is very thin, and especially so in the argument that he's an anti-Semite. But this is where people go to battle stations almost automatically. His critics go to battle stations, including those in the media, immediately after things like this happen. They see things through that prism, and they respond as they do. And I think it's damaged them, and it's not helpful to the country.
Well, and it's not just the president taking blame. Dan Rather says this in a tweet: mass murder at a Pittsburgh synagogue, a killer targeting African Americans in Kentucky. That's another case that hasn't gotten as much attention. The bomb maker. The focus should not be only on Trump, but all who excuse, abet, or stand in silence while hate is stoked for political gain. So that reads to me, if you're not actively criticizing this president, you're a part of the problem as well.
Yeah, you're complicit in these crimes. And what I would say about this, out across the country, I think, sensible, reasonable people looking at this who may not particularly care for Trump, but may also appreciate some of the results he seems to have gotten, they look at that and they say, that's nonsense. It's ridiculous. The person responsible is the person responsible. And you can't draw that kind of a connection reasonably. You don't know enough to do that if it were there to be drawn. So I think this kind of stuff is utterly regrettable, and it is. You look at the standing that we in the news media enjoy with the public, and it's about as low as it's ever been. And this kind of stuff is one of the reasons for that. It's just, the stuff is just not credible to people. They think it's unfair, and they think it's biased, and they're not wrong about that.
Yeah, and that only adds to the president's argument about the media for a lot of folks. Brit Hume, thank you. Always great to have your insights and expertise. Well, the man suspected of sending pipe bombs to a number of prominent Democrats and CNN was in court today. Cesar Sayoc appeared to be emotional during his court appearance in Miami. Phil Keating is there live with more on what we've learned today. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Shannon. The pro-Trump partisan zealot mail bomb suspect was somewhat relaxed and joking around, smiling with his attorneys in the courtroom. But then the U.S. magistrate walked in and the tone turned quite more serious as the charge and the sentence that faces him suddenly seemed to materialize, a virtual life sentence if he's convicted. 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc, sporting a tiny ponytail, shackled and wearing prison scrubs, his initial appearance over within just 4 minutes. Magistrate Edwin Torres went through the 5 counts he's facing, including illegally mailing explosives and threatening former presidents, in this case, 2 of them, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. Sayoc said only what was needed, invoking his right to remain silent. At one point, he looked around at the standing room only courtroom, spotted his sister, and appeared to tear up. Afterwards, new video surfaced this evening of Sayoc at a 2017 Melbourne, Florida Trump rally, where he is seen slamming CNN, joining the crowd, holding a sign with his huge biceps as the crowd chants, "Tell the truth" and "CNN sucks," which have become automatic, repetitive, and hostile at every Trump rally. This footage, released tonight by documentary maker Michael Moore, an outtake from his film Fahrenheit 11/9. If convicted, Sayoc faces up to 48 years in federal prison. Again, he's 56 years old. According to the Miami Herald tonight, federal agents found a potential hit list of 100 targets inside his white van, which included all of the intended mail bomb recipients of the past week. Representing Sayoc in court today, attorneys who've represented him before in his dozen or so other run-ins with the law.
If you were in custody facing probably or potentially the rest of your life in jail, you cannot by definition be doing good.
With a possible 15th package bomb discovered today in Atlanta addressed to CNN, all were to either prominent Democrats, Trump critics, or recipients of Trump's wrath. FBI agents arrested Sayoc Friday morning in Broward County. Investigators say they connected him and his fingerprints with the evidence found on a package sent to Democrat Maxine Waters. His now infamous white van, festooned with right-wing stickers and slogans, including those glorifying Trump and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama's faces in crosshairs, is now in the FBI possession. So Sayoc has apparently been living in that van for at least a couple of years, possibly built the bombs in that van, and in his jobs over the past 2 months or 7 months at 2 different pizza delivery joints, delivering pizzas to people's homes in that van, excuse me, nobody was alarmed enough to alert authorities. Sayoc will be back here at the U.S. Courthouse in Miami Friday for at least one more hearing where they will discuss his bond and his upcoming extradition to New York City, which is where the Department of Justice ultimately plans to try him. Shannon.
All right, Phil Keating live for us tonight in Miami. Thank you very much. Our new developments coming up on the Caravan, and we will take you inside with William Lajeunesse. He's traveling with the migrants as they make their way toward the southern U.S. border. He'll have a live report. And as President Trump sends more than 5,000 troops to the southern border, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton joins us live to talk about a more permanent solution. Tonight, we're getting reports that the first caravan, still hundreds of miles from the U.S. border, is showing signs of wear and tear. Some migrants reportedly asking for help to get back to Honduras. The Associated Press points to, quote, misbehavior by some fellow travelers, as well as exhaustion for those dropouts. William Lajeunesse joins us tonight from southern Mexico, where he's been traveling with the group. William?
Well, Shannon, tomorrow morning we're expecting 10 buses here to move the women and children to the next town up about 33 miles. But the big news is the organizers of this caravan have requested from the state of Oaxaca 150 buses to move the entire caravan to Mexico City. It's about 450 miles. It's about a 3-week walk. It's a lot of mountainous roads, very hilly, and they say for the safety of the caravan as well as motorists, they need those buses. There was an official here today from Mexico City looking at the needs, what they might need in that city to care for a group this large. And frankly, one of the only areas to handle that is Azteca Stadium that has the facilities. Also, we are told, and this is remarkable, but from October 31st to November 5th, Mexico City, 3.5 million residents are going to be without water while they repair the pipelines. So not an ideal time to deal with 7,000 migrants. Also, we've been talking all week about how uninformed many of these individuals are. They're coming from Honduras. They don't know a lot about the U.S. Well, today for the first time, we saw a U.S. lawyer advise or counsel them on how to apply for asylum in the U.S. The 5 questions, he said, they needed to answer. Why are you running away? Who's threatening you? What's your relationship to that person? Why did you not tell police? And why can't you live in another city in Honduras? He did say that they should be prepared to be detained for a week or months and could be separated from their children. Some may take a train. We saw some this weekend on the train. There's this next town we're going to. They can also catch that train, obviously get to the United States border quicker. What do we have so far? They're still looking at 7,000 in this caravan. 1,700 requested asylum. 700 said they want to go home. And 100 have applied for work permits here in Mexico. But we did speak to one man who said, hey, I'm going to stay in Mexico, make some money, and then pay a coyote to cross illegally.
To work for about 1 year to make the money to pay the coyotes for pass to United States. We need to work around 1 or 2 years to make the money.
One world official told us he's concerned about when the caravan arrives in Tijuana. They don't have any of the facilities there, worried that some of the young kids could turn into drug mules for the cartels. Shannon?
It's a tough situation, William. Thank you for reporting right there on the scene for us for a number of days. We know that will continue. Thank you. All right, 2 big takeaways on the caravan tonight from the president's interview with Laura Ingraham. First, the president is sending active duty military to the border rather than additional National Guard troops, 2,000 of them already there. Second, he's signaling it's going to be much tougher for migrants seeking asylum. So let's bring in Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton to talk about all the latest developments. Mr. Attorney General, good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we know 5,200 active duty troops are going down. We're told that they are not going to be confronting migrants. They're going to be logistics, helping with aviation, medicine, staging areas, but there's been plenty of backlash. I want to read you something from the ACLU. They say this: President Trump has chosen just before midterm elections to force the military into furthering his anti-immigrant agenda of fear and division. The reality is that many of the non-citizens arriving at our borders are exercising their right in international and domestic law to seek asylum from violence and persecution at home. Your response?
That's ridiculous. You know, the president has an obligation to defend the border and to protect the citizens of this country and of my state from illegal immigration and some of the consequences that we've had to deal with in my state over the last, decades and decades. And so he's doing his job, and I hope he continues to do his job. I think he's doing a great job, actually.
Well, and interesting in the Washington Post reporting on this today, they said this: Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto on Friday offered temporary work permits, medical care, and other benefits to migrants if they agree to register with authorities and remain far from the U.S. border. But the core group of mostly Honduran migrants has rejected his entreaty and continued heading north toward the U.S. border. What obligation do people have to stop in a country they're passing through if that could be a safe spot for them versus coming to the U.S., which clearly is going to have a better economic situation?
Well, look, there's an opportunity for them to avoid what's going to happen at the border, which I don't think Trump is going to let them in. If you look at what he's relying on, it's the same law that he relied on with the travel ban, which says that he specifically has the authority to limit entry of any class of non-resident aliens that he views as detrimental to the country. In this case, that's what he's relying on. The Supreme Court upheld that in a recent case that you're familiar with in June, Trump versus Hawaii. And they said basically the president could limit the scope, how long somebody came in, when they came in, whether they come in, and the conditions of how they come in. So he's perfectly within his rights to stop them from coming into this country, including getting asylum.
While we have you, I want to ask you about another case that has cropped up. This is a voter fraud case in Texas. 4 people have been arrested, indicted on voter fraud charges that they paid others involved with the scheme where they were allegedly going to try to put together absentee or mail-in ballots and try to mark some of them up or scam people out of their ballots. The attorney for the main woman who's been charged says that it is politically motivated and it will be dismissed. A lot of folks, casting doubt on whether there is actually an issue of voter fraud in this country.
Yeah, there is. And look, this is an ongoing investigation, so I don't want to comment specifically on that case, but I will say that we've prosecuted many other cases in this state. If we had more resources, we'd prosecute more. This narrative that there's no voter fraud is just not true. I can tell you we are pursuing many, many cases in this state, and if, like I said, if we had more resources, we'd pursue more.
All right, we're going to keep an eye on the border in this case as well. Attorney General Ken Paxton of Texas, thank you.
Hey, thank you. Have a great evening.
You too. All right, up next, the aftermath of the tragedy in Pittsburgh, contrasting views, some blaming President Trump for his rhetoric, now asking him not to visit the city. Others say the president is welcome. Our panel is going to talk about it next.
He's my president. He's certainly welcome. The President of the United States is always welcome. I'm a citizen. He's my president. He's certainly welcome.
That was Tree of Life Rabbi Jeffrey Myers when he was asked whether he would let President Trump visit his synagogue tomorrow when the president and first lady visit Pittsburgh to pay their respects to the victims and survivors of the tragedy. And in the wake of the synagogue shooting, a renewed criticism of President Trump emerges. Despite being an unabashed pro-Israel hawk, the president's now accused of being anti-Semitic. New York Magazine, for example, explains Trump's ideology is anti-Semitism without Jews. Quote, Trump lambasts his enemies as globalists, which, through its implication of extra-national loyalty, closely tracks the primary accusation made against Jews. Let's talk about all of this with our power panel tonight. Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt, assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal editorial page, James Freeman, and Fox News contributor Jamu Green. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
Hey, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon. Okay, this is just a tough, horrible story. Let's wade into it. This is what the president said in his tweets about what happened. All of America is in mourning over the mass murder of Jewish Americans at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. We pray for those who perished and their loved ones, and our hearts go out to the brave police officers who sustained serious injuries. This evil anti-Semitic attack is an assault on humanity. It will take all of us working together to extract the poison of anti-Semitism from our world. We must unite to conquer hate. Jamu, what more do you need to hear from the president beyond that?
Let me start by saying, Shannon, that this is an attack on all of us. This is an attack on people of all faiths, any group that has been discriminated against. And certainly, anti-Semitism is older than America. This is an issue that is much bigger than Donald Trump, and we cannot just talk about it and cover it through the lens of Donald Trump. But there is no question that this president has parroted the playbook of white supremacists and neo-Nazis, and he has provided comfort to people like David Duke and Richard Spencer and their followers, and that has real-world consequences.
Jamu, what would you,
and stereotyping has real-world consequences.
What would you point to him saying? Because when confronted, he has emphatically denied and denounced those people and their statements. So what in his past do you identify as him being supportive of those groups?
Certainly a wink and a nod and the lip service and the joking he does is inappropriate in these moments. It's one thing when he turns on the teleprompter and says the right thing and then gets on the stage and says the complete opposite thing. And I think from a policy standpoint, we cannot forget that this administration cut funding to fight domestic extremism, to fight white supremacists and neo-Nazis here in America. Okay. And that is something that cannot be explained. But again, looking at the rise in these incidents, this is bigger than Trump. This is something we have to be responsible in the media. This is something that principals and college presidents, the increases on college campuses and high schools is disturbing.
Let me bring in the gentleman here. James, I'm going to start with you, because there are those who point to the president saying things like using the word nationalist or even globalist, and they say those are dog whistles, and in many ways they are viewed as anti-Semitic. Is that fair?
No, it's not fair. This is an attack that has nothing to do with the president, carried out by a person who was very critical of the president. Specifically, seems to have believed the president was either too pro-Israel or too supportive of Jewish groups for the shooter's taste. In any case, there's no connection to President Trump, but you could think that looking at a lot of media coverage over the last several days, and I think the president is angry about that. I think he has a right to be, but I hope when he goes to Pittsburgh tomorrow, he takes the high road.
Well, Charlie, I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, this is a president who is described as very pro-Israel. I mean, he found a Nazi war criminal that was hiding out in the U.S. and deported him. He moved the embassy, as Israel has been promised for decades was going to happen. He's taken a lot of steps to be very supportive of the Jewish community. He has family members who are Jewish. And yet, I want to read something from Nathan Friedman, something that he tweeted. He says, if, quote, I can criticize Soros and not be anti-Semitic was your hill to die on this weekend. You're a callous piece of blank. Anti-Soros rhetoric feeds anti-Semitism. If you don't see this, you're either foolish or perfectly okay with it. I mean, people are raising questions now, well, what about criticism of Sheldon Adelson or other people who maybe are on the other side of the political spectrum and also happen to be Jewish?
It's insane. It's just pure insanity. And this is what happens when people take politics and they make it govern every aspect of their lives. They become so twisted up they can't see pure logic. They can't see that they go off on these crazy tangents about Donald Trump somehow being anti-Semitic and being partly responsible for this horrible event that happened in Pittsburgh. And I'll tell you, the reason that I think it's not only dishonest but also dangerous is that I don't want that animal that did this to share the blame for what he did with anyone. I want him to own every ounce of that, as he should, and as the law will certainly find. And the idea that we're going to sort of spread blame around beyond that. The other thing, Shannon, that I just breaks my heart to think about those families. Think about that congregation. They're going through the most horrifying, unspeakable grief of their life. And all around the country, people are trying to turn it into politics. It's insane. People need to take a breath, step back, put the politics away, and realize that an unspeakable tragedy happened here. And we pray for these people. We light candles for them. We do whatever to try to come together. But it's not about politics.
Well, that's a good point to leave it on. And we'll watch as the President and First Lady visit tomorrow, and they say they want to be there to comfort and to unify. So that is their mission, and we'll all be watching. Jamu, James, and Charlie, thank you all.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, with the midterms just days away, whom will voters hold responsible, if in any way, for the recent tragedies across the country? We're going to talk with Republican Congressman Mark Walker, who joins us live next.
An attack on America's values, are protecting those of faith. It cannot and will not be tolerated.
That is the message from the Trump administration on the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, where 11 worshipers were killed on Saturday, 6 others injured. Congressman Mark Walker is a pastor and chairman of the Republican Study Committee, joins us live to talk about this and other things. Welcome. It's good to have you with us.
Always a privilege.
I know you felt in your own community Saturday it was important to reach out to your Jewish brothers and sisters and constituents and spend some time with them.
Yeah, I was just riding around when I heard the news and headed to Temple Emmanuel, our local synagogue there in Greensboro. Just kind of slipped in the back road, just offering whatever support we could at that moment.
Well, I wanted to bring up something that comes from a piece today in The Hill. It's an opinion piece by Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who we've had on the show before. He says, as yet more Jewish blood is absorbed into the earth, we cannot allow these events to be sharpened into political spears to be hurled against political opponents. that would only deepen the divides within a nation that direly needs to be healed. How do we heal from something as horrible as this?
Shannon, that's a great question for the 21st century, not just politics, but our age in general. It's almost like we have this thirst on both sides, waiting for any tragedy or anything to happen that we can spin it to a kind of a political advantage. It's a travesty, and as it is, and we should allow those people to grieve. We should grieve with them. But the fact that we're so quick to jump, I think it's a sad state of where we are as a country at this point.
All right, so let's talk about some things that are purely political, and those are the midterms. Watching very closely, I'm sure as everyone else is, some interesting polling numbers out of the LA Times with USC, and they talked about how people are mad at both parties. They're mad at both sets of candidates. And David Lauter, writing the LA Times, says this: the, quote, hold your nose and vote brigade makes up a sizable chunk of the electorate, according to the latest UNC Dorns Life Los Angeles Times poll. With Election Day just over a week away, the poll indicates they lean toward the Democrats. That's the one reason Democrats remain favored to win back control of the House. And they're saying, listen, the base is going to turn out for both sides, but these people in the middle are kind of sick of everything, and they're going to hold their nose and votes.
Yeah, well, I'd rather they hold their nose and vote than not vote at all. Let's start there. But I was talking with my staff today. You can tell there's a little political fatigue going on throughout the country, the constant bombarding of these commercials in all these local districts of this person said this or that person said that. I can understand that. But I do believe that we're going to see an uptick for a midterm election. Even in North Carolina, there's no statewide race, but our polling is tracking. More people are coming out to vote. I think people are exercising that privilege. Will it be close in these midterms, specifically in the House? Very close, and too close to call at this point.
Well, and in the Senate, a number of fascinating races, the House as well. But today, Bret Baier on Special Report had Senator McCaskill on. And interesting, in the New York Times yesterday, they ran a piece about this, and it said, after years of running as far as they could from President Barack Obama's health care law, Ms. McCaskill and vulnerable Senate Democrats in Florida, West Virginia, and other political battlegrounds have increasingly focused their closing argument on a single issue, which is saving the Affordable Care Act. And we know that polling shows us across the board, health care is, if not the top, one of the top two issues for most voters out there. The GOP, though, is not trusted to handle it. Why aren't you connecting on that message? Because voters say they trust Democrats to do a better job of that.
Well, I think we have to continue to message specifically what we've accomplished. We were able to get the individual mandate repealed, which was allowing people not to be forced to buy a government product. But as far as Claire McCaskill and others in their district, I think my brother was born in Missouri, the show me state. I think a lot of these people want to see the results of what's transpired. And it's interesting because the Democrats are talking about how bad health care is right now. May I remind them that we're still operating under the ACA, under Obamacare. The only thing that we've been successful, to our remiss, is to be able to repeal that one particular component of Obamacare, of the ACA. So when they talk about pre-existing conditions and all the things they're concerned about, we're still under Obamacare. In fact, it was the Republicans who got through the House, the AHCA, that, unlike what we hear sometimes, kept pre-existing conditions, left the pre-existing conditions alone, made sure there was a pool for pre-existing conditions while trying to lower the premiums for everyone else.
Well, it is a huge issue as we have this 1 week left, so we know it's going to get talked about a lot. Congressman Mark Walker, thank you for coming in.
Always a privilege.
All right, next, the mainstream media turns on Beto O'Rourke. Will Ferrell hits the campaign trail in Georgia, and President Trump unveils a new midterm ad telling voters, quote, we can't go back. That and more in your midterm roundup coming up next.
Security to invest in the ones that matter.
Look, we can't get distracted from the biggest issue, which are jobs and our kids' future.
The New York Times runs a critical piece about Beto O'Rourke. That story leads tonight's midterm roundup. The Times detailing a 2006 development deal the Texas Democratic Senate candidate once backed when he was a local official in El Paso. The proposal, offered by O'Rourke's father-in-law, was widely criticized at the time for unfairly targeting an historic Mexican-American neighborhood. O'Rourke later abstained when the plan came for a vote after being accused of backing moneyed elites. 8 states, 6 days. President Trump ramping up his campaign schedule in the final days of the midterm races. The president will end his blitz by making one final stop in Missouri, November 5th. Well, the president's campaign arm out with a new $6 million ad buy focusing on the economy and making a final pitch to voters entitled, We Can't Go Back.
This could all go away if we don't remember what we came from and choose the right future.
We'll see if it resonates with voters. Meanwhile, Florida Democratic Senator Bill Nelson comparing the U.S. political tensions today to those of Rwanda shortly before the African nation's genocide. 800,000 Rwandans died in the tribal fighting in the 1990s. Senator Nelson's fighting off a challenge from Republican Governor Rick Scott.
We saw what happened to the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda. It turned into a genocide. 1 million people hacked to death within a few months. And we have got to watch what's happening here.
And stars hitting the streets in Georgia to campaign for Democrats. Comedian Will Ferrell went door to door recruiting volunteers and campaigning for gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. Well, a number of fundraising campaigns have been set up in the wake of the Tree of Life synagogue shootings in Pittsburgh. Shay Katiri's GoFundMe page may be the most impressive. Kateri is a graduate student at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and a political refugee from Iran. Now, he thought initially he might be able to raise about $500 to be donated directly to the synagogue, but as of now, the amount raised is nearly $800,000. He's got a new goal of $1 million. Katari says he has been the recipient of the Jewish community's generosity, and he just wants to find ways to give back. Shay Katari and all those reaching out to help the Tree of Life community, you are our midnight heroes. Well, tonight, most watched, most trusted, and most grateful you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream. Stick around for Tucker.